The morning sun cast long shadows across the modest ranch house just outside Fargo, Dakota Territory. When Adelaide Vaughn lifted the heavy earthenware bowl filled with fresh milk and carried it to the kitchen table where the cream would rise to the surface by evening in this late summer of 1876. Adelaide had been running the small dairy farm alone for nearly 6 months now, ever since her father passed from pneumonia that bitter February, leaving her at 22 years old with 40 acres, 12 cows, 2 horses, and more determination than most men twice her age could muster. The work exhausted her from sunup to sundown, but she refused to let anyone in town tell her she needed to sell and find herself a husband to take care of her. She would prove them all wrong, even if her hands grew calloused and her back ached something fierce by day's end. The next morning, Adelaide carefully skimmed the cream from the milk that had settled overnight, her practiced hands moving the shallow ladle across the surface with precision born from years of watching her mother perform this same task. The cream would be churned into butter later, which she would sell in town along with the fresh milk. It was not much, but it kept her fed and the property taxes paid. She was so focused on her work that she did not hear the approaching horse until it was nearly at her front porch. Adelaide looked up sharply, her heart racing as it always did when unexpected visitors arrived. A woman alone had to be cautious, especially out here where the nearest neighbor was 2 miles down the dusty road. The man who dismounted was tall and lean, with sun-weathered skin and dark hair that needed cutting. He wore the typical garb of a working cowhand, dusty leather chaps over worn denim, a faded blue shirt, and a hat that had seen better days. He moved with the easy grace of someone who spent more time in the saddle than on his own 2 feet. "Morning, madam," he said, removing his hat to reveal kind eyes the color of strong coffee. "Name's Samuel Peterson. I heard in town you might be looking for some help around the place." Adelaide set down her ladle and wiped her hands on her apron, studying him carefully. She had mentioned to Mrs. Henderson at the general store last week that she could use an extra pair of hands, especially with winter coming, and so much work to be done before the first snow. But she had not expected anyone to actually show up. "Who told you that?" she asked, keeping her voice steady despite her surprise. "Mrs. Henderson. She said Adelaide Vaughn was the hardest working woman in the territory, but that even the hardest workers need help sometimes." He gave her a slight smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "I have been working cattle drives the past 8 years, but I am looking to settle down somewhere, do honest work that does not involve eating dust for months at a time." Adelaide considered this. She could certainly use the help, and he seemed respectable enough. Mrs. Henderson would not have sent him if she thought he was trouble. Still, she had to be practical. "I cannot pay much," she said honestly. "Room and board in the small cabin out back, and what little I can spare from the butter and milk sales. It would not be much, maybe a few dollars a month." Samuel nodded as though he had expected this. "Room and board is fine by me, madam. I have been sleeping on the ground for so long. A real roof sounds like luxury. As for the pay, well, I am more interested in putting down roots somewhere than getting rich." There was something in his voice, a sincerity that made Adelaide want to trust him. She needed help, that much was undeniable, and something about this cowboy made her think he was exactly the kind of person her father would have hired. "All right then, Mr. Peterson. You can start today if you are willing. The cabin needs some cleaning out, but it has a good stove and a decent bed. There is much work to be done before winter. Just call me Samuel, madam, and I am willing." "Then you can call me Adelaide," she replied, and for the first time in months she felt a small weight lift from her shoulders. Samuel proved to be as good as his word. By the end of the first week, He had repaired the fence in the north pasture that Adelaide had been trying to fix for a month, cleaned out the barn, and somehow coaxed the stubborn old pump to work properly again. He rose before dawn and worked until after dusk, never complaining, never asking for more than what they had agreed upon. Adelaide found herself looking forward to their meals together, which they took at the main house since it seemed foolish for them to cook separately. He was easy to talk to, with stories from his years on the cattle drives that made her laugh, something she had not done much of lately. He spoke of crossing rivers swollen with spring runoff, of stampedes that turned the night into thunder, of the vast emptiness of the plains that could make a man feel both insignificant and free all at once. "Why did you really want to stop?" she asked one evening as they sat on the porch after supper, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. "Most cowboys I have known live for the trail." Samuel was quiet for a long moment, his gaze distant. "I suppose I got tired of never being anywhere long enough to matter. You drive the cattle to market, you collect your pay, you spend it, and then you do it all over again. There is no building anything, no putting down roots. I watched my friends get old before their time, their bodies broken from years in the saddle, with nothing to show for it but memories and aching joints." He turned to look at her, and Adelaide felt something flutter in her chest at the intensity of his gaze. "I want more than that. I want to build something that lasts." "That is what my father wanted too," Adelaide said softly. "He came out here with nothing but a wagon and a dream, built this place from the ground up. He did a fine job of it, and he raised a daughter strong enough to keep it going." The compliment warmed Adelaide more than it probably should have. She was not used to being seen as strong, not by men anyway. Most of the men in town looked at her with pity or barely concealed disdain for trying to do man's work. As September gave way to October, the work intensified as they prepared for winter. Samuel proved invaluable, his strength and experience making quick work of tasks that would have taken Adelaide weeks to complete on her own. They worked side by side, and Adelaide found herself noticing things about him she had no business noticing. The way his shirt stretched across his shoulders when he lifted heavy sacks of grain, the sound of his laughter, the gentle patience he showed with the animals. She tried to push such thoughts away. He was her hired hand, nothing more. She could not afford to complicate things with foolish romantic notions, but her heart seemed to have ideas of its own. It was a crisp morning in late October when everything changed. Adelaide was in the kitchen, carefully skimming the cream from the fresh milk as she did every morning. Samuel had come in from the early milking, bringing 2 more buckets that needed to be strained and set aside. He stood in the doorway, watching her work with an expression she could not quite read. "You have got that down to an art," he said, stepping closer. "My mother used to do that same thing when I was a boy. I had forgotten how peaceful it looks." Adelaide smiled, not looking up from her task. "It is one of the few things I truly enjoy about this work. There is something satisfying about it, separating the cream from the milk, knowing exactly what you are getting." Samuel moved to stand beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him. "You know," he said, his voice suddenly softer, more intimate, "watching you work these past months I have been thinking." "About what?" Adelaide's hand stilled, her heart beginning to race. "About how you are like that cream you are skimming. You are the best part, Adelaide. The richest, the most valuable. You are the cream of my life." Adelaide looked up at him, the ladle frozen in her hand. His eyes were warm and sincere, full of emotions that made her breath catch in her throat. She had never had a man look at her like that, as though she were something precious and wonderful. "Samuel," she whispered, not sure what else to say. "I know I am just a cowboy with nothing much to offer," he continued, but these months here with you have been the happiest of my life. I wake up every morning grateful for another day of work beside you, another evening of talking on the porch, another meal shared. You have given me something I did not even know I was looking for." "What is that?" Adelaide asked, her voice barely audible. "A home, a purpose, a reason to build something that lasts." He reached out and gently took the ladle from her hands, setting it aside before taking both her hands in his. "I am in love with you, Adelaide Vaughn. I think I have been since that first day when you agreed to take a chance on a drifting cowboy." Adelaide felt tears prick her eyes. She had been alone for so long, carrying the weight of everything by herself, never letting anyone see how scared she sometimes was, how lonely. And here was this good, kind man telling her she did not have to be alone anymore. "I love you too," she said, the words spilling out before she could second-guess them. "I have been trying not to, trying to tell myself it would only complicate things, but I cannot help it. I love you, Samuel." He smiled then, a brilliant, joyful smile that transformed his entire face. Then he was pulling her close, and she was going into his arms as naturally as breathing, and when he kissed her, it felt like coming home. They stood there in the kitchen, holding each other, while the cream sat forgotten on the table and the autumn sun streamed through the windows. Adelaide felt happier than she had since before her father died, maybe happier than she had ever been in her whole life. "Marry me," Samuel said when they finally pulled apart. "Let me be your partner in truth, not just your hired hand. Let me help you build this place into everything your father dreamed it could be." "Yes," Adelaide said without hesitation. "Yes, I will marry you." They were wed 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the small church in Fargo, with Mrs. Henderson and her husband standing as witnesses. Adelaide wore her mother's dress, carefully preserved in a trunk, and carried wildflowers that Samuel had ridden out to pick that morning. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, and Samuel kissed her in front of God and the handful of townspeople who had come, Adelaide felt her whole life shift into something new and wonderful. The winter that followed was hard, as winters in Dakota Territory always were, but Adelaide and Samuel faced it together. They spent the long, dark evenings in front of the fire, making plans for the ranch, talking about the future. Samuel wanted to expand the herd, maybe add some chickens for eggs. Adelaide wanted to increase the butter production, perhaps start selling cheese as well. "We could build something really special here," Samuel said one night, his arm around her as they sat on the settee. "With both of us working together, there is no limit to what we could accomplish." "My father would have liked you," Adelaide said, resting her head on his shoulder. "He always said that the right partner could make all the difference. I am glad you think I am the right partner. I do not just think it, Samuel, I know it." As winter gave way to spring, they worked harder than ever. Samuel proved to have a good head for business, suggesting they sell directly to some of the restaurants in Fargo rather than just to the general store. The extra income allowed them to buy 3 more cows and a better bull for breeding. Adelaide's butter became known as the finest in the territory, and she found herself struggling to keep up with demand. By summer, Adelaide discovered she was with child. She told Samuel one evening in the barn, unable to wait until they were back in the house. He had been checking on a cow that looked ready to calve any day, and Adelaide had brought him some cool water from the well. "Samuel," she said, her hands twisting nervously in her apron, "I have something to tell you." He looked up from examining the cow, his expression immediately concerned. "What is wrong? Are you all right?" "Nothing is wrong. Everything is wonderful, actually." She took a deep breath. "We are going to have a baby." For a moment, Samuel just stared at her. Then he was across the barn in 3 long strides, lifting her up and spinning her around, laughing with pure joy. "Careful," she said, laughing too. "Put me down before you make me dizzy." He set her down gently, then knelt in front of her, pressing his hands against her still flat stomach. "A baby," he said in wonder. "Our baby." "Are you happy?" Adelaide asked, though his reaction had made the answer clear. "Happy? Adelaide, I am the luckiest man in all of Dakota Territory. The luckiest man in the whole world." The pregnancy progressed smoothly, though Adelaide found herself tired more easily as the summer heat intensified. Samuel insisted she do less of the heavy work, taking on more himself and hiring a young man from town to help with the harvest. Adelaide protested at first, not used to being taken care of, but eventually she gave in, recognizing that she had to think about the baby now. They spent the evenings preparing the small room off their bedroom as a nursery, painting the walls a cheerful yellow, and building a cradle from oak wood Samuel had been saving. Adelaide sewed tiny clothes and blankets, her heart swelling with love for the child she had not even met yet. "What do you hope for?" Samuel asked one evening as they worked. "A boy or a girl, I do not care either way," Adelaide said honestly, "as long as the baby is healthy." "I feel the same, though I have to admit, the idea of a little girl with your eyes sounds pretty wonderful. And a boy with your kind heart would be equally wonderful." The baby came on a cold February morning, almost exactly a year after Adelaide's father had died. The labor was long and difficult, attended by the midwife from town and Mrs. Henderson. Samuel paced the kitchen, nearly wearing a path in the floorboards, until finally, just as dawn was breaking, he heard the sound he had been waiting for, a baby's cry. Mrs. Henderson came out a few minutes later, her face wreathed in smiles. "You have a son, Samuel. A healthy boy with a good, strong set of lungs." Samuel rushed into the bedroom where Adelaide lay exhausted but glowing, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in one of the blankets she had sewn. She looked up when he entered, tears of joy streaming down her face. "Samuel, meet your son," she said softly. Samuel approached slowly, almost reverently, looking down at the red-faced infant who was already quieting in his mother's arms. The baby had a shock of dark hair and tiny perfect fingers that wrapped around Samuel's thumb when he offered it. "He is perfect," Samuel whispered. "You are perfect. I love you so much." They named him James, after Adelaide's father. As the weeks passed and James grew stronger and more alert, Samuel and Adelaide marveled at what they had created together. The baby became the center of their world, though the ranch work still needed doing. They fell into a new rhythm, taking turns caring for James while managing the farm. By the time James was 6 months old, sitting up and laughing at everything, the ranch was more prosperous than ever. Samuel's business sense combined with Adelaide's quality products had made them successful enough to hire permanent help, a young married couple who lived in the cabin Samuel had once occupied. This freed up more time for Adelaide to focus on James and for Samuel to pursue his plan to expand the cattle operation. The years passed in a blur of hard work and happiness. James grew into a sturdy, curious toddler who followed his father everywhere, insisting on helping with chores even when he was more hindrance than help. When he was 3, Adelaide gave birth to a daughter they named Rose. 2 years after that came another son, Thomas. The house that had once seemed too large for just Adelaide now rang with the sounds of children playing, laughter, and life. Samuel added on to the original structure, building more bedrooms and a larger kitchen. The ranch prospered beyond what Adelaide's father had ever dreamed, becoming one of the most successful in the territory. On a warm summer evening when James was 7, Rose was 4, and Thomas was 2, the family gathered on the porch as they often did after supper. The children played in the yard, chasing fireflies, while Adelaide and Samuel sat close together on the swing Samuel had built, watching them with contented hearts. "You remember that first morning?" Adelaide asked. "When you showed up at my door looking for work?" Samuel smiled, pulling her closer. "How could I forget? I thought you were the most beautiful woman I had ever seen, even with that suspicious look on your face." "I was not suspicious, just cautious." "You were suspicious," Samuel insisted, laughing, "but I do not blame you. A strange cowboy showing up unannounced, it makes sense to be wary. I am glad Mrs. Henderson sent you my way. I do not know what would have become of me if you had not come along. You would have been fine. You are the strongest person I know, Adelaide. But I am selfishly glad I came along too, because otherwise I would have missed out on all of this." He gestured to the children, the house, the thriving ranch around them. "I would have missed out on the greatest adventure of my life." Adelaide turned to kiss him, still feeling that same flutter in her chest that she had felt when he first told her she was the cream of his life. "I love you, Samuel Peterson." "I love you too, Adelaide Peterson. Always." James came running up to the porch then, his younger siblings trailing behind him. "Papa, tell us the story again about how you and Mama met." Samuel laughed and pulled James up onto his lap, while Rose scrambled up beside Adelaide, and Thomas climbed onto Samuel's other knee. "All right, but then it is definitely bedtime." "It was the late summer of 1876, Samuel began, his voice taking on the storytelling quality the children loved. "And I was a cowboy who had spent too many years drifting from place to place, never settling down. Then one day, I heard about the prettiest, hardest-working woman in all of Dakota Territory who needed help on her ranch." "That was Mama," Rose chimed in, having heard this story dozens of times but never tiring of it. "That was your Mama," Samuel agreed. "So I rode out to meet her, and there she was, skimming cream from fresh milk in her kitchen, and I knew right then that she was someone special." "And then what happened?" Thomas asked, even though he knew perfectly well. "Then I told her she was like that cream, the very best part, the richest and most valuable. I told her she was the cream of my life." The children giggled, delighting in this romantic story of their parents' courtship. Adelaide smiled, her heart full to bursting with love for her family. "And then Mama said yes when you asked her to marry you," James supplied. "She did, and it was the best day of my life. Well, one of the best days. The days each of you were born are pretty high up there too." After the children were finally tucked into bed, their eyes heavy with sleep, Adelaide and Samuel returned to the porch. The night was warm and clear, with stars scattered across the sky like diamonds. "I have been thinking," Samuel said after a comfortable silence. "Maybe it is time we made this place official." "What do you mean?" The ranch has never had a proper name. "What would you think about calling it the Vaughn Peterson Ranch, honoring both your father's legacy and our future together?" Adelaide felt tears prick her eyes. "Samuel, that is perfect. Papa would have loved that." "Then it is settled. Tomorrow I will get a sign made in town." They sat together in the peaceful night, listening to the sounds of the ranch settling down for sleep, the soft lowing of the cattle in the distance, the chirp of crickets in the grass. Adelaide thought about how much her life had changed since that morning when Samuel Peterson had ridden into her yard. She had been so alone then, so burdened by grief and responsibility. Now she had a partner, a family, a life richer than she could have ever imagined. "What are you thinking about?" Samuel asked, sensing her contemplative mood. "How grateful I am. For you, for our children, for all of this. Sometimes I can hardly believe it is real." "It is real," Samuel assured her, squeezing her hand. "And it is only going to get better. We have built something strong here, Adelaide. Something that will last for generations." As the years continued to pass, Samuel's prediction proved true. The Vaughn Peterson Ranch became known throughout Dakota Territory and beyond for its quality dairy products and well-bred cattle. James grew into a responsible young man who took naturally to ranch work, already showing signs of his father's business sense and his mother's dedication. Rose inherited her mother's skill with butter and cream, while Thomas had a gift for working with the animals that exceeded even his father's considerable talent. When James was 12, Samuel began teaching him the finer points of cattle breeding and business negotiation. He took his son with him to meetings with buyers, showing him how to assess an animal's worth, how to negotiate fair prices, how to build relationships that would last for years. Adelaide did the same with Rose, teaching her the old recipes her own mother had taught her, passing down knowledge that had come across the ocean from ancestors in the old country. The territory continued to grow and change around them. Fargo expanded from a small frontier town into a bustling city. The railroad came through, making it easier to transport goods to distant markets. Samuel was quick to take advantage of this, establishing contracts with restaurants and hotels as far away as Chicago. The prosperity allowed them to hire more help, to invest in better breeding stock, to improve the house and outbuildings until the ranch was one of the finest in the region. Through it all, Adelaide and Samuel remained as devoted to each other as they had been on their wedding day. They still took their evening walks around the property when weather permitted, still sat together on the porch after the children were in bed, still found reasons to steal kisses when they thought no one was watching. The children would groan and look away when their parents showed affection, but secretly they loved seeing how much their mother and father cared for each other. When James was 15, a drought struck the territory. For months, the rain refused to come, and the grass turned brown and brittle. Many ranchers were forced to sell their herds at a loss, unable to feed them. But Samuel had been careful over the years, setting aside reserves for just such an emergency. He had also invested in a well deep enough to supply water even in the driest times. The Vaughn Peterson Ranch weathered the drought better than most, and when it finally broke, they were in a position to help their neighbors rebuild. This generosity did not go unnoticed. Samuel and Adelaide became respected leaders in the community, the kind of people others turned to for advice and assistance. They hosted gatherings at the ranch, bringing together neighboring families for celebrations and mutual support. Adelaide organized a women's group that helped new settlers get established, while Samuel worked with other ranchers to establish fair pricing and sustainable practices. The children grew up immersed in this atmosphere of community and cooperation. They learned that success was not just about personal gain, but about lifting up those around you. These lessons shaped them into good, decent people who would carry their parents' values into the next generation. When James was 19, he told his parents he wanted to go to agricultural college in Minnesota to learn new techniques and scientific approaches to farming and ranching. Samuel and Adelaide were proud of his ambition, though they would miss him terribly. They sent him off with their blessing and enough money to see him through his studies. Rose, at 16, had become a beautiful and accomplished young woman who could run the dairy operation as well as her mother. She had also caught the eye of several young men in the area, though she seemed in no hurry to settle down. Adelaide was secretly glad. Rose had plenty of time for marriage and should enjoy her youth. Thomas, at 14, spent every spare moment with the horses and cattle, displaying an almost intuitive understanding of animal behavior. Samuel joked that Thomas could speak cow and horse, and in a way, it was true. Animals that were skittish with others would calm under Thomas's gentle hands. One evening, as Adelaide and Samuel sat together on their porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. Samuel took her hand and said, "We have done well, haven't we?" Adelaide looked at him, seeing the silver that now threaded through his dark hair, the lines that life and laughter had carved into his face. He was as handsome to her now as he had been 20 years ago when he first rode into her yard. "We have done better than well," she replied. "We have built exactly the kind of life I dreamed of as a girl, better actually because I never imagined I could be this happy." "I was so lost before I found you," Samuel said reflectively. "Drifting from place to place, never feeling like I belonged anywhere. You gave me roots, Adelaide. You gave me everything." "We gave each other everything," Adelaide corrected. "I was drowning in grief and responsibility, trying to prove I could manage alone. You showed me that accepting help is not weakness, that partnership makes us stronger." They sat in comfortable silence, fingers intertwined, watching as the stars began to appear one by one in the darkening sky. Inside the house, they could hear Rose humming as she helped prepare supper, Thomas talking to the new puppy he had been training. The sounds of home, of family, of a life well lived. "You remember what I said to you that morning in the kitchen?" Samuel asked. "About you being like the cream?" Adelaide smiled. "I remember everything about that morning. It was the beginning of my real life." "Mine too." "And I meant every word, Adelaide. You are still the cream of my life, the very best part of everything. You always will be." Adelaide leaned over to kiss him, her heart as full now as it had been on their wedding day. "And you are mine, Samuel, my partner, my love, my home." As the years continued their inexorable march forward, the Vaughn Peterson ranch continued to prosper. James returned from college with new ideas about crop rotation and scientific breeding that he implemented with his father's support. Rose married a neighboring rancher's son, a good man named Daniel who respected her intelligence and abilities. They built a house on the eastern section of the property, close enough for Rose to continue working with the dairy operation while starting her own family. Thomas, following in his father's footsteps, took over the day-to-day management of the cattle operation when he turned 21, displaying a combination of his father's business sense and his mother's meticulous attention to quality. Under his management, the ranch's cattle became even more sought after, known for their healthy constitution and good breeding. When Adelaide was 51 and Samuel was 55, they became grandparents for the first time when Rose gave birth to a daughter. The baby was named Adelaide, after her grandmother, and Samuel joked that now there were 3 generations of strong Vaughn women, even if the youngest bore the Peterson name through her father. More grandchildren followed over the years. James married a schoolteacher from Fargo and they had 3 children. Thomas married a girl from a neighboring ranch and they had 2 sons. The ranch house, which Adelaide and Samuel had expanded over the years, now regularly filled with children and grandchildren during holidays and Sunday dinners. Adelaide loved being a grandmother, though she found it both wonderful and strange to watch her own children navigate the challenges of parenthood. She and Samuel did their best to offer support without interfering, remembering how they had appreciated being allowed to find their own way. On their 25th wedding anniversary, Samuel surprised Adelaide with a trip to Minneapolis, the furthest she had ever traveled from the ranch. They stayed in a fine hotel, ate at fancy restaurants, and saw a theatrical production that left Adelaide marveling at the world beyond her familiar territory. But as wonderful as the trip was, they were both happy to return home to the ranch, to their family, to the life they had built together. "I think we are just old farm folk at heart," Samuel said as their train pulled into Fargo Station and they saw James waiting with the wagon to take them home. "There is nothing wrong with that," Adelaide replied, squeezing his hand. "I would not want to be anything else." When Adelaide was 61, she fell ill with influenza that swept through the region. Samuel sat by her bedside day and night, refusing to leave her side despite the children's urging that he rest. He brought her cool water when she burned with fever, piled blankets on her when she shook with chills, read to her when she was too weak to do anything but listen. "You are not leaving me," he told her fiercely when the fever was at its worst. "We still have too much living to do." "I need you, Adelaide. I will always need you." Whether it was Samuel's determination, Adelaide's own strength, or simply luck, she recovered slowly but surely. By spring, she was back on her feet, though she moved a bit slower and tired more easily. Samuel insisted she take it easy, and for once, Adelaide did not argue. She had given him such a scare, and she knew how precious their time together was. They celebrated their 30th wedding anniversary surrounded by their children and grandchildren. The house could barely contain everyone, so they set up tables outside in the warm June evening. Adelaide looked around at the faces of her family, at the ranch that spread out in all directions, at Samuel sitting beside her with his hand in hers, and felt overwhelmed with gratitude. James stood up to make a toast. "To my parents," he said, raising his glass. "They took a failing ranch and turned it into one of the finest in Dakota Territory. More importantly, they showed us all what real love and partnership looks like. They taught us to work hard, to treat people fairly, and to never give up on our dreams. Everything good in my life I owe to their example." Rose stood next. "Mama, Papa, you gave us roots and wings. You showed us how to be strong while still being kind, how to be successful while still being humble. You are the foundation this family is built on." Thomas was the last to speak. "You two are proof that real love exists and that it gets better with time. Thank you for showing us how it is done." Adelaide was crying openly by the time the toasts finished, and Samuel's eyes were suspiciously bright as well. They stood together, and Samuel said, "We are the lucky ones. You children and your families are our greatest achievement. Everything else, the ranch, the success, none of it would matter without you." As the celebration continued around them, Adelaide and Samuel slipped away for a moment alone, walking down to the pasture where the cows grazed peacefully in the evening light. 30 years, Adelaide marveled. "It seems like yesterday and like a lifetime ago all at once." "Best 30 years of my life," Samuel said. "I would not change a single moment, not even the hard times, the drought, the illnesses, the struggles, not even those," Samuel confirmed. "The hard times made the good times sweeter. They taught us what we were made of, and we faced them all together, which made all the difference." Adelaide rested her head on his shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of him, leather and hay and home. "I love you, Samuel Peterson. From that first morning until my last breath, I will always love you. And I love you, Adelaide Peterson. You are still the cream of my life, the very best part of every single day." They stood there as the sun set over their land, over the legacy they had built together, over a life rich with love and purpose. The years ahead would bring more changes, more challenges, more joys and sorrows as life always did. But they would face it all together, as they always had, partners in every sense of the word. As they walked back to the house, where their children and grandchildren waited, Adelaide thought about that young woman she had been 30 years ago, alone and overwhelmed, skimming cream from milk in her kitchen. That woman could never have imagined the happiness that was coming, could never have dreamed that a drifting cowboy would walk into her life and give her everything she had never known she wanted. But he had, and she had, and together they had built something beautiful. Not just a successful ranch, though they had certainly done that. Not just a family, though their children and grandchildren were their greatest joy. They had built a love story that would be told and retold, a partnership that proved that the right people at the right time could create magic out of ordinary life. The house glowed with lamplight and rang with laughter as they approached. Someone had started playing the piano, and Adelaide could hear Rose singing while the grandchildren danced. Samuel held the door open for her, and as she passed through, he caught her hand and pulled her close for one more kiss. "Thank you," he whispered against her lips. "For what?" "For saying yes that day in the barn, for taking a chance on me, for every single day since." "Thank you for showing up at my door," Adelaide whispered back. "For seeing me, for loving me, for building this life with me." They stood there for a moment longer, holding each other in the doorway, before joining their family inside. The night was full of joy and love, of memories made and memories shared. And through it all, Adelaide and Samuel remained at the center, the foundation upon which everything else was built. Years continued to pass, each one adding new layers to the story of their life together. They watched their grandchildren grow, saw some of them choose to stay on the ranch while others pursued different paths. They adapted to new technologies and changing times, always keeping the core values that had guided them from the beginning. When Samuel was 70 and Adelaide was 66, they decided to officially hand over the ranch operations to their children. James, Rose, and Thomas had been running most things for years anyway, but this was the formal passing of the torch. Samuel and Adelaide kept their house and remained active advisors, but the daily responsibilities now rested on younger shoulders. This transition gave them time to simply enjoy each other's company. They took walks every evening when weather permitted, sometimes not talking at all, just being together in comfortable silence. They sat on their porch and watched the world go by, holding hands and remembering all the years that had brought them to this point. Adelaide taught her granddaughters the art of skimming cream and making butter, passing down the skills her own mother and grandmother had taught her. She told them stories of the old days, of their grandfather riding into the yard looking for work, of building the ranch from almost nothing into something substantial. Samuel taught his grandsons about cattle and horses, about integrity in business, about the importance of treating people fairly. He told them about his days on the cattle drives, about learning what really mattered in life, about the day he met their grandmother and everything changed. The stories became part of the family lore, told and retold, each generation adding their own experiences to the ongoing narrative of the Vaughn Peterson Ranch. On their 40th wedding anniversary, the family threw another large celebration. This time there were great-grandchildren present, tiny faces that made Adelaide marvel at the passage of time. How had she gotten old enough to have great-grandchildren? Yet here they were, proof of the legacy she and Samuel had created together. That evening, after the guests had gone home and the house was quiet, Adelaide and Samuel sat together on their porch as they had done thousands of times before. 40 years, Samuel said, shaking his head in wonder. Where did the time go? Into living, Adelaide replied. Into building something that matters. Into love. Samuel pulled her closer and she rested against him, feeling the steady beat of his heart. They were both slower now, their hair white, their faces lined with age. But the love between them had only grown stronger, deepened by decades of shared experience, of facing life's challenges together, of celebrating life's joys side by side. I would do it all over again, Samuel said. Every single moment exactly the same way. So would I, Adelaide agreed. Well, maybe I would have said yes to marrying you a little sooner. 3 weeks seemed like a long time to wait. Samuel laughed, the sound warm and familiar. I proposed the day we first kissed. I could hardly have proposed sooner. You could have proposed the day we met. You would have thought I was crazy. I already thought you were crazy, showing up looking for work on a ranch that could barely support one person, let alone two. Best crazy decision I ever made. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars come out one by one. Somewhere in the distance, a cow lowed softly. Closer by, a horse whinnied in the barn. The sounds of the ranch at night, sounds that had formed the backdrop of their entire life together. "You remember what you were doing when I first told you I loved you?" Samuel asked. "Skimming cream from fresh milk," Adelaide replied immediately. "I will never forget it. You said I was like that cream, the best part, the richest and most valuable. You said I was the cream of your life." "You still are," Samuel said softly. "You always will be. Every day I spend with you is the best day of my life. Even better than yesterday. Especially better than yesterday, because we have one more day of memories, one more day of loving each other." Adelaide turned to kiss him, her heart full of the same love she had felt as a young woman, only deeper now, richer, seasoned by time and experience. The years that followed were gentle ones. Samuel and Adelaide watched their family continue to grow and flourish. The ranch remained successful under the combined management of their children, adapting to new times while maintaining the values and quality that had always been its hallmark. When Samuel was 78, his health began to fail. His heart, which had worked so faithfully for so many years, was simply wearing out. The doctor said there was nothing to be done except make him comfortable. Adelaide refused to leave his side, sleeping in a chair next to their bed, holding his hand through long days and longer nights. Their children gathered, along with grandchildren and great-grandchildren. The house was full of family, of love, of people who existed because Adelaide and Samuel had taken a chance on love 46 years ago. On a warm spring morning, with Adelaide's hand in his and his family surrounding him, Samuel passed peacefully. His last words were, "I love you, Adelaide. You are the cream of my life." Adelaide felt as though part of her soul had been ripped away. Samuel had been her partner, her love, her other half for nearly half a century. The world felt wrong without him in it. But she was surrounded by her children and their families, and she knew she had to be strong for them as she had always been. Samuel was buried on a hill overlooking the ranch, where he could watch over the land he had loved and helped to build. The funeral was attended by hundreds of people, all of whom had been touched by Samuel's kindness and integrity. The weeks and months that followed were the hardest of Adelaide's life. She had lost her father, had faced droughts and illness and all manner of challenges, but nothing compared to losing Samuel. The house felt empty without him, despite being full of family. The porch swing seemed wrong without him sitting beside her. Everything reminded her of him, and the grief was overwhelming. But Adelaide was not alone. Her children rallied around her, making sure she was never without company, that she always had support. Rose moved into the main house to help care for her mother. James and Thomas visited daily, bringing their families, filling the house with the sound of living. Slowly, very slowly, Adelaide began to heal. The sharp pain of grief softened into a gentle ache, a constant awareness of Samuel's absence, but also of his enduring presence in everything around her. She saw him in James's business sense, in Rose's kind heart, in Thomas's way with animals. She saw him in the ranch they had built, in the family they had created, in the legacy that would continue long after both of them were gone. Adelaide lived for another 7 years after Samuel's passing. They were good years, full of her family, full of watching her grandchildren become parents themselves, full of the quiet satisfaction of a life well lived. She spent her days helping where she could, teaching the youngest generation the old skills, telling stories of their grandfather and the life they had built together. On her 81st birthday, surrounded by 4 generations of family, Adelaide made a speech that brought tears to everyone's eyes. "I have been blessed beyond measure," she said. "I got to spend 46 years married to the best man I ever knew. Together, we built all of this." She gestured to the ranch, to the family. "Samuel used to say I was the cream of his life, but the truth is he was mine. He was the best part of everything, the richest, the most valuable. And all of you, every single one of you, are proof of the love we shared. You carry us forward into the future, and I could not be prouder or more grateful." Adelaide passed away peacefully in her sleep 6 months later, on a cold winter morning. She was buried beside Samuel on the hill, their gravestones side by side, overlooking the ranch that had been the stage for their great love story. The Vaughn Peterson Ranch continued to thrive under the management of the third and eventually 4th generation. The descendants of Adelaide and Samuel never forgot the story of how it all began, of a young woman alone trying to save her father's ranch, of a cowboy looking to put down roots, of a morning in the kitchen when he told her she was the cream of his life. The story was told at family gatherings, written down in journals, passed from generation to generation. It became part of the family's identity, a reminder of what real love looked like, of what could be built when 2 people committed to each other and to something larger than themselves. Years became decades, decades became a century. The ranch remained in the family, adapted and changed but still recognizable as the place Adelaide and Samuel had built. The sign that Samuel had commissioned all those years ago, declaring it the Vaughn Peterson Ranch, was carefully maintained and eventually restored, a piece of history that connected the present to the past. And on quiet evenings, when the wind blew across the Dakota grasslands, past the grazing cattle and through the old oak trees Samuel had planted, some swore they could feel the presence of Adelaide and Samuel still there, still watching over the land and the family they loved, still together even in death as they had been in life. Their love story, which had begun with a cowboy looking for work and a woman skimming cream from fresh milk, had become something eternal, a testament to the power of love, partnership, and commitment. It proved that the best things in life are built slowly, with patience and dedication, and that true love only grows stronger with time. The cream rises to the top, as it always does, and Adelaide Vaughn had been the cream of Samuel Peterson's life, just as he had been of hers. Their love story, played out against the vast skies and endless grasslands of Dakota Territory, became the foundation upon which generations built their lives, the proof that sometimes, when the right person comes along at the right time, magic happens. And so the story ended where it began, at the ranch outside Fargo, with the memory of a woman skimming cream and a cowboy telling her she was the best part of everything, with a love that lasted not just a lifetime but echoed through generations, with a legacy that would endure as long as the grasslands stretched and the stars shone overhead. It was a love story for the ages, simple and profound, as timeless as the land itself.